speaking of the mailbag, we do actually have a little bit of mailbag that we received just earlier today. We did also have one that came in a little bit earlier, but we'll say that for next week, I think. Frostbite. Do you want to do the other one then?
Do both.
All right, then we'll do both then. All right, screw it. So we had one coming in earlier this morning from Frostbite. Shout out to Frostbite, by the way. I know him from Counter-Strike. He's a lad. He's not quite 100% familiar with how the Rocket League scene works, but he asks, a lot of sports and esports give extra time after a draw. So talking about, sort of like in football, you get like 15 minutes of extra time. In Counter-Strike, you get overtime. But in Rocket League, we have the golden goal system. And he asked, do you think the golden goal system that Rocket League uses is a good fit for competitive play? And I think that overall it's just more of a necessary a necessary system, because you sort of like, compared to what Rocket League is up against, you've got something like football is sort of the main comparison point for Rocket League. And in football, if you're tired, you go into extra time. But after extra time, if you're still drawn, then you got to go into penalty shootout. Now, I don't know how it will work if you had to go into a penalty shootout in Rocket League, because what do you just place the ball in front and then both cards come away? Well, that's an easy save every time. We could be there. Or what do we just go for, like randomized setups in something like a practice pack? I think that overall, as well as that, Rocket League is also partially not just about the shooting and the scoring the goals. It's also about outplaying your opponent's team to a certain extent. There's other things you have to consider, like bumps and demos and passing plays and different things like that all contribute to what is creates the Rocket League, the Rocket League match itself. So I think the golden goal system, while it's not incredible, I still think it could be some different changes. Like maybe if we went to overtime, we could have a 30-second pause, so that way teams can discuss strategies and maybe build up a little bit of tension in the broadcast. I remember during the grand finals of the World Championship last season, there was that discussion that came up. And I think that could be beneficial, but I don't think we can do something like a penalty shootout. I think it has to be sort of overtime in the golden goal.
No, the current system is perfect because Rocket League is a very fast game. You're also remembering that you've got 5 minutes and then the overtime, which goes on until the golden goal. What I do think needs to be added is maybe during every series, a 1 minute extension break, essentially between games, which teams can use to call out and near enough talk. Because I always feel that teams don't really talk about what's going on between games quite enough. Casters, we know, can fill, essentially, they do the 1 minute absolutely fine. Now they could go in and talk an extra minute quite easily. So I think maybe giving both sides a 1 minute timeout, like you see quite a lot with League of Legends or CSGO when they do the best of 3 series, and they can do between rounds. I think between rounds, between games in a series, you could fit an extra minute in for these teams that might need, like, even if it's because the player needs to go quickly refill his drink, a minute is enough time to do that. But for me, it's more about talking about, we are going super all out into attack, it's not working, what do we do? And then the players can discuss it between themselves. An extra minute will go miles in this sort of situation, which could develop the game a little bit more. See comebacks come into it a little bit more, instead of the current situation we have in RLCS where there's been a lot of sweeps this season so far.
Oh yeah. And Frostbite is in the chat. He's asking, the reason why I bring it up is because in overtime you can still come back into it, but with golden goal means that you can make no mistakes. And I guess I can sort of see that, but the alternative is that you sort of have to score 2 goals in overtime, and it's like, well, that doesn't quite have the same sort of impact as a golden goal. There's tension will still kind of be there, and I understand where you're getting that comparison from, because in Counter-Strike, that's how it works. You need to score at least 4 rounds in an overtime of Counter-Strike. But again, the alternatives are scoring 2 goals in overtime, which doesn't have quite the same amount of tension, or doing penalty shootouts, which again, I don't see how that would work within the context of Rocket League.
Yeah, definitely wouldn't, especially when we've got down to a nice sort of like best of 5 system, which generally takes around about 45 minutes to play on out, which is roughly about the same time as a game of Counter-Strike, really, when you think about it. Not including overtimes and all of that, of course, thrown in there, because if you've just got, say, a best of 3 in Rocket League, that can be done within 25 minutes, half an hour max, if you go quickly. But of course, you've got to allow for that time to extend over, even to the point of, remember from the play, Jay, me and Jam having the cast for an 18-minute overtime. So the
I remember that.
it can be also an endurance. It just basically comes down to the teams, and that also adds a completely different sort of style. Some teams we've noticed, we'll talk about them later, like Complexity, seem to be able to handle that pressure very well and make the most out of it. Flip side as well is another team that just thrive off overtimes, whereas other teams aren't so good in that situation, so they try and get those matches done in regular time. It's all about strategy, and it adds a lot more depth to it with the golden goal system.
Yeah, I think the golden goal is just the best system that we can have for Rocket League at the moment. So yeah, thank you for the question. Obviously, it is a bit of a discussion. I would love to see a counter argument to that, to be honest, because I'm sure there are people that probably could come up with a better one than we could. But moving on to our second one that just came in during the podcast itself. Dexter Fetster, I love that man. Obviously, I met him from my time playing rhythm games. So nice to see him here in the Rocket League space, of course, getting involved. Just thinking about the move from weeklies to monthly tournaments. Would there be a potential to do a monthly tournament, but with weekly matches and a point system, so the prize pool would be monthly, but with weekly casts still in place? This actually is a very interesting question, because we did try and set something up like that back in January of 2017. Actually, my first ever casting gig in Rocket League.
Was that with Leaf?
Leaf League, yeah, it was Leaf League, and in Leaf League we had tried to set that up, but the problem is that below the RLCS level of things, we have this sort of problem where teams aren't 100% committed. And I actually would love to see like a weekly tournament that goes from, or a monthly tournament that goes from week to week. It's sort of like a league play style with like an online playoffs. I think that would be very, very interesting to try and play out nowadays. But the problem is that I think organizations are way too scared, because they've seen what Leaf League tried to do and they see how Leaf League failed. And unfortunately, that's put a lot of people off,
And it's not only Leaf that failed on it. I can tell you, we've seen a lot, like Mind Games, I can remember, did a, I think it was a $1,000, like it was just a league across the month, and that just fell after 2 weeks because we had some players or teams, that were in the bottom two. They had lost 3 games and were just like, there's no way we can win this because we've just lost to the weaker teams. We know we're not being these top teams. We're just dropping out, because they know they can't get the bigger money. And the problem is that it comes down to money, because of course that is the big pull for your time in this. And without sponsors at the moment for these smaller tournaments, no team is really going to put in, let's say, 5 evenings across a month for what could end up being $100, $150. It's just not there. That's why the Renegade Cups are a brilliant sort of like fix for this, but it's not helping. It's only helping one tournament org each month, The other ones are sort of neglected, but that's not, I think, Psyonix's problem. It's more the tournament orgs haven't got to that stage, and we haven't seen professional orgs be able to step in and fill that. It's just this sort of weird, murky grey area that we've got right now. I can say that at Rewind, when we were thinking about this months ago, and it was going like, we're going to, sponsors and that, try and get set up, we were thinking, okay, the best system for all this would be, say, these weekly qualifiers. So 3 weekly qualifiers where you get points, a bit like how Renegades Cup works actually, and then the final week of the month being the big tournament end. So you would have to play through 3 weekly qualifiers to essentially get your seed in, and then top 8 make it to a monthly finals. That was like the biggest compromise between the two, and the biggest sort of like reward offset of it. But again, try and get $1,000 each month is hard to do,
It's a hell of a commitment from a lot of sponsors, especially with businesses and organizations that aren't quite established. That's why, honestly, if anything, I'd like to see a team like an organizer like DreamHack or ESL or Starladder or any of these sort of organizers just try and step in and try to do something, because they've established themselves as being able to run leagues and say like, hey, contribute a few $1,000s a month and we'll run the plus any production costs that we might need, and we'll sort you out. And it's great because you've got a lot of good talent below the RLCS and RLRI spectrum that will be absolutely willing to work on those kind of tournaments. And if you can just avoid just sort of like being going over the $5,000 limit that Psyonix adds, which, by the way, might add, I think that needs to be increased by a significant amount. That'll be a topic for another day. As long as you can avoid that, maybe say, we'll do a $4,000 monthly. We'll do something like that. And
straight off, the $1,000 monthly that Rival did. One, always great production from them, but two, the viewership we got for $1,000. Can we just say there is so much room here? Can sponsors not see that this is easy advertisement for them? Because of course, that engagement with streams is better than what you can get from just, I don't know, wallpaper ads. I say wallpaper ads, but scroll bar ads or whatever on websites and all of that. They need to, it's because we're in a sort of like fresh new field for advertising, and a lot of these orgs and sponsors don't really know enough about it. They know how they can engage through streamers, but not tournament organizers, which it's not, I would say, down to the orgs' faults. It's just basically we don't know how to go to these companies to get their sponsorship effectively.
Yeah, and again, that's why I'd like to see someone like DreamHack or ESL take onto it, or better still, those guys have funding. Psyonix, lift that $5,000. Lift that $5,000.
Cheaper for Psyonix,
yeah. Yeah, it's just cheaper for them because you're not contributing any of the money. You don't need to contribute any of the money. You can keep it. Like even if you put something like $50,000. That's not enough to set up a minor LAN or a minor league, and doesn't even, conflict with something like the RLCS, which has now got $1 million up for grabs. Teams are always going to want to compete in the RLCS regardless. So I'd like to see that restriction kind of lifted. But again, that's another topic that we can get deeper into another day, because we are starting to run out of time. We need to get to our tournament updates. Of course, I did see that we had one more mailbag coming, Tiger. We will get to that next week, I think, because again, we have got half an hour and we have a lot of fucking RLRS results to get through, Bacon.